The military is instituting a sex-neutral physical test, which makes sense. You should be able to do all the physical components, whether you are a man or a woman. Also, Ketanji Brown Jackson made a really interesting statement during oral arguments on whether or not parents have the right to pull their kids out of LGBTQ lessons. And the World Economic Forum has a new chairman, and it's even more Bond villain than the last guy. I don't know if they can't read the room or what's going on there. All that and more coming up on this episode of Turning Point Tonight. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. This is Turning Point Tonight. Now, before we get to that and to our panel, I need to make the case for this. Now, if you don't know this, the White House is trying to incentivize Americans to have more babies. We have a population crisis here, and so they're looking for ways to say, hey, how can we get people to have more kids? Well, I have to ask this question. What would actually happen if parents were exempt from paying income tax? As we said, the White House is currently trying to figure out how to convince Americans to have more kids, so I figured we'd throw this into the ring. What happens if we run the math on government tax revenue for an individual with no kids and an individual with 3 kids but does not pay state or federal income tax? First things first, let's establish revenue for the government as a whole, meaning the federal government, the state, the local, all just government. If someone with 3 kids is exempt from paying income tax but still has to pay consumption tax, Social Security, Medicaid, property tax, etc., in terms of government revenue, how does that stack up with a person who does have to pay income tax but doesn't have any kids? Let's look first at the childless individual. Now, we're not going to adjust for inflation here because it would affect both sides and effectively cancel out. So let's just assume an average $50,000 a year for a childless adult. Each year, they would fork over about $12,000 in taxes, $4,000 in federal income tax, about $3,800 in payroll tax, $2,500 in state income tax. Obviously, that varies. And roughly $1,700 in sales tax. Over a 40-year working career, including minimal taxes in retirement, that's a total lifetime tax bill of a little over $500,000. Now let's take the parent of 3 kids with the exact same assumptions minus income tax. Over 40 years, that's about $250,000 for that parent alone, which is about half of the childless adult paying in income tax. However, here's the thing that people miss. That parent has 3 kids. And if we assume that those 3 kids don't have any kids whatsoever, which I think is unlikely, the tax revenue generated for the entire family during the course of that parent's life who does not pay income tax is well over $1 million and is twice or possibly even triple the tax revenue of the single adult. And that doesn't account for just 3 kids on their own. For the record, if they have those 3 kids have kids, well, it just generates more and more revenue for the government. The bottom line is, we have a population collapse problem and we need Americans to have more babies. And if the White House is looking to incentivize Americans to have more babies, exempting parents from income tax not only will generate more money at a lower rate, but could incentivize people to have more kids. Here to comment about on that and so much more is Chrissy Clark, host of the Underreported Stories podcast, and actor and Fox contributor Siaka Massaquoi. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate having you. Chrissy, I want to start with you here. I don't want to break any news, but as a person who possibly could be looking to start a family in the future, what does this, option look like to you?
Yeah, I think there's another option spelled out in the Trump plans from a New York Times article saying that there could possibly be $5,000 bonuses as well. And I'm like, hey, sure, I'll take $5,000. But at the end of the day, I was really thinking through all of this. This is not just about, a little bit of cash up front for this. I was genuinely wondering how the Trump administration plans on initiating this, and then kind of getting a little serious and was like, wait, aren't there going to be a ton of discrimination lawsuits? Because down the hall from me is the lesbian couple. And if I'm getting $5,000 for a baby, is the lesbian couple down the hall getting $5,000 for their IVF baby? Like, where is this going to go? I'm just sitting there holding tight, being like, guys, I'm super on board with trying to get population up, trying to have more babies, creating a culture of family. I'm all on board. But listening to some of these plans, I'm like, grabbing my seat, kind of ready for the roller coaster ride of inevitable court battles from something like this.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. It would be very complicated, and there's lots of caveats and variables. But what I would hope is that, hey, we've eliminated income tax for families and people with kids, and then the people that get super upset fight to not get our income tax back, but instead take their income tax away too. So we just eliminate income tax altogether. And if this is the way we do it, maybe that's the way it works. Siaka, as a parent, you honestly would probably end up paying more with your whole family if you don't pay income tax as a whole right now. What are your thoughts? Would that help you out? How do you feel?
I love the idea, but I think Chrissy's right. Like, we got to be careful because this is the first time in history right now that, not counting adoption, but people can pay someone to get pregnant for them, and then they can take the baby, and the baby is not genetically connected to anyone, which is kind of a weird place. And you imagine this, how people would use that to get paid off. But this does remind me of what Public Square is doing. Is that anyone, I think it would be cool if they incentivize jobs. So like anyone in Public Square who's working and they have a kid, they get that $5,000 bonus for them. But just, you know what, let's just get rid of income tax. Tax is theft anyway. Let's the rule of law, right, guys? So let's just get rid of all of it. Like, we could start there, have the heavy debate, and come with a conclusion that I think everyone would agree with, and that's just get rid of tax.
This is what I love about conservative talk shows just in general. I feel like I threw out a really red, meaty piece of just, hey, less income tax for families. We all love that. And still, we have people who are on our side of the aisle saying, yeah, but there's a lot of things to think about. So, regardless where you stand on this, I really appreciate the inclusivity that we have here on the conservative side of the aisle. Speaking of inclusivity, this is deemed as not inclusive whatsoever. Pete Hegseth said that women, earlier in the administration, said that women are going to be eliminated. Sorry, the standards that are lower for women in combat situations are going to be eliminated. Now, a new sex-neutral physical test has been instituted, or will be instituted, starting in June and then being fully implemented in 2026 January. In order to pass the physical fitness test, women from 17 to 21 need to be able to lift 140 pounds in a deadlift instead of the formerly required 120, and will also need to run 2 miles in 22 minutes instead of the 23 minutes and 22 seconds. Chrissy, does this seem unreasonable? Like, the left is making this big thing of this is discriminatory, but again, we're talking about combat fighting roles. What are your thoughts?
I love that the left is like, girl power, girls can do everything. And then simultaneously, also, they can't run 2 miles in under 22 minutes. It's like really stupid, their logic there. But I just don't think that when you go to combat, that your enemies are going to look and go, well, there's girls on the ground there. Maybe we should drop the girl bomb. Like, that's not how this works. Combat is combat. And unfortunately, you need to be ready for it. So I think a lot of people look at this, unfortunately, as like regressive or evil, that we would hold women to the same standard as men, while simultaneously the same side says, well, men can compete in women's sports. But honestly, this is a protective measure for women, right? This is just about upholding a standard and keeping everybody to the standard. It's so common sense that, this is why the left loses elections, because they can't figure out what common sense is and how to win people over with it.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how much there's women can do all the things, and then when it comes to combat, except for that thing, Siaka, I think I don't want to be too blunt about it, and I don't really want to make too much fun about it. We're talking about a fighting force whose sole job is to be as lethal as possible. I can't imagine why it would make sense for anybody, man, woman, gender, race, whatever, to have lowered standards. It didn't really make sense to begin with. Where did that idea come from?
The Marxist. That's where it comes from. If you want to destroy a powerful country from within, you implement silly, silly things like lowering standards for our fighting forces. The military is not a social experiment. It should never have been. Because I tell you this, people, the Al Qaeda or ISIS, they're not going to care. They're not going to, as was mentioned earlier, not going to drop a certain type of bomb. They're going to just bomb everybody and then run over people. So you got to get rid of this stuff. And I love that they're getting back to some sanity there in our White House and how we run things. Let them cry about it, because after a while, most of the people crying about it will never actually even join the military to even get involved. So I kind of just plug my ears to keep moving forward.
Yeah, getting rid of everything that doesn't make common sense. Speaking of getting rid of things, RFK Jr., Health Human Services Secretary, came out yesterday and said, "Hey, we're gonna try and get rid of all of these, in his words, toxic food dyes." Chrissy, as somebody, I'm sure, well, all of us here are pretty conscious about, hey, making sure we're staying healthy on our own because you can't depend on government healthcare to do anything. Uh, is this is good move, bad move? You think has a chance of actually working its way all the way through to be actually implemented by the big food manufacturers?
Yeah, I would really hope so. I know that the HHS has already said that they're planning on cracking down on this earlier. They'd given food companies a deadline of 2027, 2028, and they're like, never mind, we can't wait on this. Because there's so many problems that have come from this. And, back to the first story we were talking about with families and whatnot, the infertility rates of women would be it's something that HHS should address with this growing crisis of women unable to have children. And I think a lot of it stems down to our health and our food culture here in America. And we would be really well off to implement that family agenda by going after it from a health lens. So I hope that it doesn't just stop with food dyes. I hope it goes into all aspects of making families great again and healthy again.
People at home might not be able to see this, and I don't want to make it weird, but Siaka is shredded in terms of just a very muscular, well put together man. Siaka, I only got about 30 seconds here, but from a health perspective, what are your thoughts?
I love this. I do think this is going to help. I mean, we have dumber people in our populace right now, and the biggest issue is our food. Well, second biggest issue to our education is our food. And I'll say the only thing I will miss is that cancer-causing yellow five. Like, man, what am I going to do without that? But I think
Big
that
fan.
we have to get our obesity problem down. And these dyes are killing us right now. And it's like we got to get our country back into on the right track and bring back the presidential fitness test too. I'll just add that into the whole
Huh.
mix since we're
Interesting. Comes out a proponent of Yellow Five, just a big Yellow Five fan.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's all you got from that. That's
yeah. Siaka and Chrissy will be right back after the break to discuss Ketanji Brown Jackson and the Supreme Court hearing that LGBT alphabet thing versus the parents. Can the parents pull their kids out of the lesson? Also, just a reminder, YWLS Turning Point's Young Women's Leadership Summit is happening June 13th through the 15th in Dallas, Texas. I know Chrissy has been there. Siaka has not. He's not been there because he's a man. But if you're a woman, you can go. Sign up at tpusa.com. We will be right back after the break. Don't go away.